She thought it was just a stray puppy, but when she looked into its eyes, she saw something ancient, something sacred. The vet called it dangerous. The government called it illegal. But she called it a gift from a God who answers in mysterious ways. And when they tried to take it away, she stood against the world armed with nothing but love and faith. The wind had a different bite that day. Cedar Valley, tucked beneath the curling ridges of Montana's northern mountains, wore its late autumn like a memory of winter to come. The pines whispered in the distance, brittle and cold, while mist curled low across the roads like breath from an unseen beast. The sun had started to descend behind the tree line, casting a copper glow over the cracked two-lane highway that cut through the forest like an old scar. Emily Harper squinted against the chill, pulling the collar of her wool coat tighter as she stepped out of her dented teal Subaru. She was 32, slender, with an angular face softened by freckled cheeks and tired blue eyes that had once been more curious than cautious. Her auburn hair was tied in a loose braid that swung gently across the back of her patched flannel shirt. She had moved to Cedar Valley just 2 weeks prior, trading city skylines and gallery openings for pine shadows and silence. Her fingers, once stained with oils and charcoal, now bore the roughness of chopping wood and cleaning dust from window panes that hadn't been opened in years. She had driven down into town to pick up some supplies, canned soup, paper tea, and was now heading home before the light slipped completely. It was then at a bend in the road, near an old wooden sign that had once read Jasper Trailhead, that she noticed the crate. It sat awkwardly beside the ditch, half covered by a stained blue tarp, flapping lightly in the breeze. Her first instinct was to keep driving. People dumped things here all the time, broken TVs, old furniture, even tires. But something made her stop. Emily turned off the ignition. As she stepped onto the gravel shoulder, her boots crunched against frost-laced leaves. The wind hissed low through the branches. She approached the crate slowly, the hairs on her arms rising not from the cold but from something older, deeper, an echo of memory. Her sister Margaret had died on a hiking trail just like this 6 years ago. Lost during a sudden snowstorm, never found. That memory was stitched into every pine needle around her. The crate groaned as she tugged the tarp aside. Her breath caught. Inside, curled tightly into a trembling ball, was a small animal. It had a smoky gray coat, thick and matted in places with hints of black along the spine. Its ears were large and soft, folded slightly back. The creature looked up at her with enormous golden eyes too knowing, too human. It didn't bark or growl, it just stared, silent. "Hey there," Emily whispered, her voice cracking against the wind. "What are you doing out here?" There was no collar, no tag, just a thin length of frayed rope around its neck, now dangling uselessly. The crate smelled faintly of damp straw and motor oil. Emily crouched beside it, one hand on the door latch, the other held open in invitation. Slowly, cautiously, the pup, if it was a pup, crawled toward her hand and pressed its nose to her palm. She shivered, but not from the cold. There was something electric in the contact. It wasn't like touching a dog. It was like brushing fingers with a storm. No signs of injury, no blood, no obvious wounds, but it was thin, and its paws looked raw from travel. She could not in good conscience leave it here to die. Maybe someone dumped it. Maybe it wandered away from a farm. Either way, the road was no place for a creature so small and so ancient. Emily lifted it into a thick flannel blanket she kept in the back seat. It weighed more than she expected. The animal curled into the folds of the fabric without resistance, its breathing shallow but steady. She shut the passenger door, turned the heat on high, and drove home through the dusk with her new passenger curled up like a secret beside her. Her cabin was a modest A-frame nestled at the edge of the woods, where the porch lights flickered slightly when the wind pressed too hard against the power lines. Inside was warm, cluttered with canvases, brushes, and the smell of peppermint tea. As she entered, a long, scratchy yowl rang out from the couch near the window. Finn, her 17-year-old tabby cat, glared at her. He was a wiry old thing, fur patchy in places, eyes green and permanently narrowed in suspicion. He'd been with her since college through broken leases and broken hearts, and now through isolation. Finn hissed softly as Emily set the crate down. "Easy," she muttered, rubbing his chin. "Just a guest." She opened the crate. The pup, or wolf, or fox, or something in between, peered out cautiously. It sniffed the air, then stepped out, claws clicking softly against the wooden floor. Emily watched as it padded in a small circle, then sank beside the fireplace, the blanket still draped over its back like a shawl. "Whisper," Emily said suddenly. The name rose to her lips unbidden, as though given. "You're so quiet, but you say a lot." The animal didn't respond, but its ears twitched. Emily smiled. She crouched and brushed a hand across its fur, surprisingly soft beneath the dirt. Its eyes closed slowly. Later that night, with a cup of tea in her hand and Finn perched stiffly behind her on the couch, Emily watched Whisper sleep beside the fire. The flames danced shadows across the walls, and outside the wind howled like distant memories trying to find their way home. She didn't know then what she had brought into her life. Not fully, but she felt it like the first ripple before a storm or the breath before a name is spoken for the first time. Whisper had come from the wild. But maybe, just maybe, it was the wild sent to heal her. The days in Cedar Valley were brief in late autumn, the sun reluctant to rise and eager to fall behind the evergreens. Morning light filtered through Emily Harper's window like a promise, soft and hesitant. Inside the cabin, the warmth from last night's fire still lingered faintly in the wooden floorboards, and the scent of pine smoke drifted in the air like memory. Whisper, still nameless to the outside world, had claimed a spot near the hearth where the rug was frayed and sun-kissed. She stretched silently, her sleek gray coat catching the light like polished stone, and blinked her golden eyes toward Emily. It had been 5 days since the creature appeared in Emily's life, and already the cabin felt fuller. Not crowded, Emily hadn't felt crowded in years, but inhabited. Whisper moved with a grace beyond her size, almost cat-like, but with a sense of purpose that spoke of something more ancient. She didn't bark. Not once. Not even when the mail truck passed or when Finn hissed from atop the bookshelf, tail puffed in disapproval. Instead, every evening, when the sky blushed lavender and shadows stretched long across the pine-covered hills, Whisper would lift her head and release a low, haunting sound, not quite a howl, not quite a hum. It filled the cabin like smoke, lingering long after it faded. On the 6th morning, Emily left the back door ajar while she brought firewood in from the shed. When she returned, she found the door gently nudged shut. A paw print, distinct, four-toed, too large for a dog that small, rested on the dusty wooden floor beside it. Later, she watched in awe as Whisper, after pawing the light switch several times in playful curiosity, managed to turn it off with her nose. Emily stared, breath held, then laughed, truly laughed for the first time in months. By the end of the week, Whisper had learned how to nudge open the cabinet where treats were kept, pull the blanket off the couch and curl into a tight circle in the exact center of it, and open the porch screen door with her paw by pressing just hard enough against the lower hinge. Nothing about her was ordinary, and yet everything felt strangely right. On a pale Sunday afternoon, the knock came. It was soft, twice polite, and when Emily opened the door, a boy stood there with a plastic bag of books cradled in his arms like treasure. He was about 10, freckled with sandy brown hair that curled slightly over his ears and oversized glasses that slid down his nose. His clothes were neat but thrifted, an oversized yellow hoodie and faded jeans too short at the ankles. "Hi," he said, blinking rapidly, not meeting her eyes. I live next door. With my mom. I saw the dog. Through the trees. Is she nice?" Emily crouched slightly to his eye level. "She's quiet," she said, "and curious." "What's your name, Liam?" he mumbled. I brought some books. They're about animals, real ones, and some stories. I read out loud to my cat. He doesn't care, though. There was something in his voice, a rhythm, a slight delay. Emily recognized it. She had volunteered at a literacy center in college, and this cadence was familiar. Dyslexia, perhaps. She softened her tone. I think Whisper might care, she said. Whisper. Liam's eyes lit up for the first time. That's her name, she told me. Emily smiled. Can I try? Emily opened the door wider. Whisper was lying near the fireplace, her head resting on one paw, eyes half-lidded but alert. As Liam stepped in, she rose slowly, padding toward him without hesitation. She was still small, maybe the size of a foxhound, but her legs had lengthened and her gait was smooth and silent like mist. She sniffed Liam's outstretched hand, then gently bumped her head into his chest. She likes me, he said, stunned. I think she does, Emily replied. Liam sat cross-legged on the rug and pulled out a worn copy of Charlotte's Web. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened the cover. The words came slowly, haltingly as he read aloud, pausing at hard syllables, whispering through others. Whisper didn't move. She lay down beside him, her head tucked into his lap, eyes closed, tail thumping softly whenever Liam read a particularly excited line. He smiled each time. Emily watched from the kitchen, fingers curled around a warm mug of tea. She had planned to paint today. A new canvas waited by the easel, still blank. But she remained still, watching this boy and this creature, as if afraid that moving would break whatever fragile miracle was unfolding. Liam became a regular presence. He would come every other afternoon, sometimes bringing new books, sometimes just to sit. Whisper seemed to know when he was arriving. She would rise 5 minutes before his knock and wait by the door. The two would curl together on the rug like old friends who needed no words between them. One day, Liam brought a small recorder. He shyly explained that he liked to make soundscapes for my brain, he said. It helps me not panic. He recorded Whisper's evening hum, layering it with sounds of wind, rain, and soft piano keys from Emily's old upright. The final piece was haunting, like the woods had found their voice. His mother, a tired-looking woman named Jill with eyes like Liam's, and a quiet strength in her posture, came by one evening to thank Emily. She was in her mid-30s, tall, with short hair streaked prematurely with gray. She wore work boots and a mechanic's shirt stained with oil. Her tone was calm but filled with emotion. Liam doesn't connect. Not usually. And he doesn't read out loud to people. Not ever. I don't know what this animal is or what she's done, but thank you. Emily only nodded. How could she explain Whisper wasn't just a companion? She was something else. A soul that had arrived not by accident, but by purpose. Emily felt it in her bones. One evening, as the three of them sat watching the embers fade to ash, Liam looked at Whisper and asked, She's not really a dog, is she? Emily didn't answer right away. She simply looked at Whisper, her golden eyes reflecting firelight, her breath even and steady, and whispered, She's what she needs to be. Outside, the first snow began to fall soft and quiet, as the animal who now called the cabin home. The snow that had begun as a whisper now coated the trees in thick silence. Cedar Valley shimmered beneath its frozen veil, the pines frosted white and the sky tinted with the pale gold of early December light. Emily Harper zipped up her wool coat and glanced toward the edge of the forest where Whisper stood, nose to the wind, eyes focused on something far beyond what human senses could catch. It had been nearly 3 weeks since the day she found the creature in the crate by the roadside. Whisper was no longer small, not truly. She had grown rapidly, her limbs longer, her frame lean and sinewy like that of a young deerhound, but her presence was something else. There was a stillness to her when she wasn't moving, a stillness that felt almost ancient. Her golden eyes had deepened in color now, reflecting the world around her with uncanny intelligence. Emily watched her from the porch steps, hot mug pressed between her palms. There was a weight in her chest that she hadn't felt since Margaret's disappearance, an odd tension between love and fear. She had buried the image of her sister long ago, Margaret standing on a mountain trail, wind whipping her raven hair, eyes bright with some secret joy. But now Whisper stirred. Something tugged at memories long shut away. Whisper turned sharply and vanished into the tree line. Emily stood. Whisper, she called, heart rising in her throat. She placed the mug on the railing and began following the print's four-toed deep set, not quite right for a dog. She walked for nearly 5 minutes, the cold biting at her cheeks, until she saw a flicker of movement in the brush. There, under the shadow of a leaning pine, Whisper crouched low, her body tense. Then she pounced. Emily screamed. A flurry of snow erupted, and when it settled, she saw the creature emerge with a limp squirrel dangling from her jaws. Her eyes gleamed not in bloodlust, but in the satisfaction of instinct fulfilled. "Whisper, no drop it." Emily ran, slipping slightly on the frozen ground. Whisper dropped the animal and tilted her head. She didn't growl, she didn't whimper. But her eyes, those eyes were no longer soft. They were wild. Emily scooped up the lifeless squirrel with trembling fingers, wrapping it in her scarf. "You can't do that," she muttered. "You're not supposed to." "You're not." But even as she spoke, she knew the lie in her voice. Back at the cabin, Whisper retreated to her corner by the fire, curling tightly into herself. Emily stood above her, unsure whether to scold or comfort. In the end, she did neither. She sat down beside her and whispered, "I don't know who you are anymore." That evening, Liam arrived with his cheeks pink from cold and his usual too large yellow hoodie layered under a navy winter coat. He carried a sketch pad under one arm, his other hand gripping a thermos. "Mom made cocoa," he said, handing it over. "She said thanks again for letting me come." Emily nodded. "Always." Liam stepped inside and immediately dropped to his knees beside Whisper, who lifted her head and bumped his shoulder with her nose. Her tail thumped once. She always responded to Liam differently, softer, like she recognized something gentle in him. "I drew something," he said, flipping open his sketch pad. "Took all week." The image stopped Emily cold. It was Whisper drawn in charcoal and gray pastel, standing atop a rocky cliff beneath a wide, full moon. The wind pulled at her fur, her head tilted back in silent howl. Around her, trees bent like they were listening. Above her, stars fell like tears. "I called it Wild Heart," Liam said. "It's like she's talking to something that isn't there." Emily's fingers trembled as she traced the edge of the page. The moon, the cliff, the angle of the trees. She had seen this before. In her dreams she hadn't told anyone. Margaret had been there in those dreams, standing at the same edge, her arm outstretched, her voice calling Emily's name over and over, always fading into the howl of the wind. "Did she pose for this?" Emily asked. Voice quiet. "No. Just felt like it," Liam said. "I get these pictures in my head sometimes, and they won't go away until I draw them." Emily sat down heavily in the armchair, her eyes still fixed on the image. "Do you think Liam began that some animals remember who they were before, before people?" Emily looked at him. He wasn't asking in the way most children did. He wasn't asking if Whisper was a reincarnation or a spirit. He was asking if she remembered. "I think some of them never forget," Emily answered. The wind outside howled as if agreeing. Later that night, after Liam had gone, and Whisper had returned to her silent corner, Emily stood by the window and watched the tree line. Something stirred inside her, not dread, not exactly, but recognition. Whisper had chased and killed not out of malice, but out of memory. That was who she was. And no matter how many blankets or firelight or bowls of kibble Emily could offer, she could not rewrite what was written in the creature's blood. But even so, Whisper came back. She always came back. And when she did, she rested her head in Emily's lap, listened to Liam's faltering voice, and made no sound but the soft thump of her tail. Some part of her was still reaching back toward the fire. The silence of midwinter hung thick over Cedar Valley, muffling even the whispers of pine branches heavy with snow. Emily Harper stood in the waiting room of Dr. Meredith Shaw's veterinary clinic. Her fingers locked around Whisper's worn leather leash, though it had never truly been needed. Whisper sat beside her, calm and poised her coat, gleaming silver under the dim overhead lights, her eyes scanning the tiled floor with mild curiosity. The clinic was small but well kept, tucked behind the town's general store. Faded posters of pet care tips and smiling golden retrievers lined the mint-green walls, though none of them seemed to match the quiet power of the creature at Emily's feet. The scent of antiseptic and old wood mixed in the air. Emily's heart thudded louder with each passing second. The image of Whisper catching the squirrel had been replaying in her mind for days, refusing to fade. She needed to know, truly know, what this animal was. She needed someone to either soothe her fear or name it. The door creaked open. Dr. Meredith Shaw stepped into the room, her presence as composed as ever. A black woman in her early 50s. Meredith carried herself with the calm authority of someone who had been through both battle and grace. She wore her curly salt and pepper hair in a neat bun, glasses perched halfway down her nose, and her lab coat, though old, was impeccably pressed. Her eyes were sharp, always searching, always measuring, but there was a warmth to her movements, slow and deliberate, like she understood that suddenness could startle both animals and their people. "You must be Emily Harper," she said, her voice smooth but firm. "And this is the guest I've heard whispers about." Emily offered a nervous smile. "She's different." Meredith crouched slowly, careful not to appear threatening. She extended a hand, palm up, and Whisper, after a pause, stepped forward and gently brushed her nose against it. "Not a typical response," Meredith murmured, watching her closely. "She moves like a predator but chooses peace when unprovoked. That's not fear, that's restraint." Emily swallowed hard. "That's part of what worries me." Meredith nodded and rose, motioning toward the exam room. "Let's take a closer look." Inside, Whisper lay still on the table, unbothered by the stethoscope or the thermometer. Meredith worked with silent efficiency, noting proportions, checking teeth, eyes pause. She paused several times, frowning faintly, then taking notes on a clipboard with a deliberate hand. Finally, she drew blood for analysis. "This may take an hour or so," she said. "You're welcome to wait." Emily settled into a wooden chair in the corner of the exam room while Whisper curled at her feet, breathing slow and steady. The snow had begun again, outside, soft flakes blurring the windows like a veil. Meredith returned an hour and 15 minutes later, her expression unreadable. She closed the door behind her with a quiet click and crossed the room to sit across from Emily. "She's not a dog," she said softly, "not even close." Emily felt her chest tighten. "Then what?" "She's Canis lupus occidentalis, a northwestern gray wolf. Based on her size, weight, and the shape of her skull, she's likely only 6 or 7 months old. But she'll grow. Fast. And she'll be strong." Emily's hands trembled. She looked down at Whisper, who raised her head in response to her name, ears tilting in gentle concern. "There's no microchip. No sign of spaying or previous medical intervention," Meredith continued, "which means she likely wasn't born in captivity. But she trusts you. And that's rare." Emily's throat felt dry. "What does this mean?" "For her. For me." Meredith leaned back, folding her hands. "It means you're currently housing a wild animal within a residential zone. State and federal law prohibit keeping wolves as pets even if they've been raised from infancy. She's not domesticated. She's bonded. That's different." Emily felt as if the floor beneath her had shifted. So, I can't keep her. Meredith hesitated. Not here, but there's another way. Emily blinked. There's a classification called Rescue Sanctuary Caretaker under Montana Wildlife Rehabilitation Law, Meredith said, pulling a pamphlet from her drawer. If you relocate to an approved property and build an enclosure meeting specific standards, you may apply for exemption status. It's not easy. It's costly. But it's possible. Emily took the pamphlet, her fingers brushing the thick paper. And if I can't? Meredith looked down for the first time. Then I'm obligated to report this. She'd be taken to a rehabilitation facility, possibly rewilded if she passes behavioral tests. But she wouldn't be yours anymore. The words hit like a stone to the chest. That night back in the cabin, Emily sat in silence by the fire. Whisper lay beside her, curled against her legs. Across the room, Finn, the old tabby, had done something unexpected. He had climbed down from his usual perch atop the bookshelf and settled beside Whisper, his frail body curled into the curve of her back. Emily watched them, predator and prey, resting in quiet peace. She reached for her journal and began scribbling numbers, land prices, fencing, material, licensing fees. It didn't matter if the cost was high. Losing Whisper would cost far more. The wind shifted in Cedar Valley, not just in the trees, but in the hearts of its people. Snowdrifts still lined the edges of the forest roads, but the sky was turning brighter now, paler and more forgiving as February rolled in. Emily Harper sat at her dining table, her laptop open in front of her, a flickering cursor blinking atop a Facebook post she had hesitated to publish for over an hour. Whisper lay beside her head, resting atop her paws, eyes closed but not asleep. The cursor blinked once more. Emily took a breath and typed. She's not a dog. She's something older, wilder. I didn't choose her, but I think God or fate sent her to me, and now they want to take her away unless I move and build a sanctuary. I can't do this alone. But maybe I don't have to. She hit post, then she waited. The story spread like fire in dry pine. By midnight, the post had over 800 shares. Comments flowed in from strangers and neighbors alike, some offering encouragement, others donations. Old friends from art school sent messages. A woman named Tina March, a librarian from Kansas, offered to send building blueprints. A man named Cal Whitaker, a retired fence contractor from the next town over, offered tools and free labor. Emily's inbox filled faster than she could read, but it was the knock on the door the next morning that truly stunned her. Standing on the porch was Maya Rivers, a local high school science teacher. Maya was in her early 40s, lean and athletic with a no-nonsense posture, and a face carved with the kind of lines only worry and hope could leave. She wore snow boots, a scarf with moons and stars, and carried a thermos of strong black coffee. "You need help," Maya said. "I brought caffeine." "Let's talk sanctuary specs." Emily blinked. How did you... Your story's all over town. Even made the local radio. I teach environmental science. My students are desperate to build something real. You've got the realest thing I've seen all year." Emily stepped aside and let her in. Within days, the plan took form. Someone from town offered access to an old abandoned apple orchard on the North Ridge, a piece of land surrounded by natural forest unused for decades but structurally solid. The owner, a reclusive elderly man named Don Gallagher, gave his blessing through a handwritten letter that simply said, "If it helps the girl and the wolf, take it." At the community center, a sign-up sheet was posted with Whisper's Sanctuary Build Crew written in thick red marker. High schoolers, college students home for winter break, shop owners, church volunteers all added their names. Every morning, Emily drove up to the orchard in her aging Subaru with Whisper sitting upright in the back seat, staring out at the winding hills as though remembering something she'd never seen. The orchard was silent except for the creak of branches under old snow, and the scent of apples still lingered in the cracked bark of sleeping trees. The build began. Cal Whitaker arrived with a pickup full of timber chicken wire and weather-treated planks. He was a burly man in his 60s, white beard tucked into a camo vest, hands calloused from decades of labor. He worked without many words, whistling old country tunes while hammering stakes into frozen soil. Maya brought her students eager, awkward, bright-eyed kids who were more used to labs and equations than splinters and frostbite. One of them, a lanky boy named Tyrell, built a makeshift pulley system that saved hours of hauling. Another, Jamie, designed an enrichment structure shaped like a fallen log maze. Whisper never strayed far. She moved among them with quiet vigilance, sniffing their gloves, occasionally curling at someone's feet as they sat for lunch. They never treated her like a dog. They didn't try to pet her. Somehow they understood she wasn't here for their comfort. She was a reason. In the midst of the chaos, Liam had an idea. "We should tell her story," he said, gripping his sketch pad. "Not just online. Like, to people." Emily looked at him. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. At the library, he added, I could read." It was a quiet revolution. Liam, once paralyzed by reading aloud, now asking for a stage. The Cedar Valley Library, a red brick building with ivy growing up its northern side, hosted the event 2 weeks later. A chalkboard outside read "Wild Heart, the story of Whisper told by Liam and friends." Dozens came. Parents, children, teachers, even the mayor. Folding chairs filled the reading room. Emily sat in the front row, her heart climbing into her throat as Liam stood behind the lectern, a copy of his story clutched in his hands. He began softly. "This is Whisper. She came from the woods, but maybe also from heaven. She doesn't bark. She remembers things no one taught her. And she listens to the wind." His voice did not waver. Not once. Behind him, Maya projected Liam's drawing of Whisper under the full moon, now scanned and colored. The room was silent, not out of obligation, but reverence. When he finished, the applause was thunderous. After the reading, a woman approached Emily. She introduced herself as Grace Atwood, a wildlife consultant from the state licensing office. Mid-40s, shoulder-length auburn hair, and a no-nonsense tone softened by the kindness in her eyes. She had heard the story, seen the post, and now she had seen the boy read. "You've built something more than a fence," she said. "You've built a community around her. That matters when it comes time to approve your permit. Keep going. You're not invisible anymore." That night, as Emily and Whisper sat on the tailgate of Cal's truck, sipping cocoa, while the last post of the enclosure went up under floodlights, she leaned into the stillness and whispered into the fur beside her cheek, "We're not alone anymore." And Whisper, as if understanding, lifted her head and howled, not loud but steady, into the starlit orchard. March arrived with a strange mixture of hope and hard frost. The orchard land, now called Whisper Hollow by the volunteers, had begun to change. What was once a quiet stretch of forgotten apple trees was now alive with the rhythm of Hammer's voices and purpose. Emily Harper stood at the edge of the construction zone clipboard, in one hand, scarf whipping in the wind. Her cheeks were raw from the cold and her hands bore the blisters of labor, but her eyes, though rimmed with fatigue, held fire. She had sold her paintings, her studio equipment, the second-hand SUV she had kept since college. Gone were the shelves of books the antique dresser passed down from her grandmother. Even the watercolor portraits of Margaret had been packed away, tucked in a box labeled later, and buried deep beneath guilt and resolve. It was all for this. For Whisper. The sanctuary blueprint was ambitious 2,000 square feet of enclosed roaming space. A shallow, man-made pond, elevated platforms, shaded dens, and a monitored observation station. Maya Rivers helped redesign the fencing with her students, accounting for wolf behavior stress indicators and habitat balance. Cal Whitaker led the digging team, his silence now dotted with occasional advice like, "A wolf can climb if she's desperate enough." Build in the bend. They worked through wind and sleet powered by cocoa adrenaline and the whisper of something sacred. Whisper adapted to the site like she had always known it. She walked the fence lines, sniffed the buried posts, curled herself beneath the oldest tree in the orchard, a gnarled crab apple with bark like lichen-covered stone. She watched everything, especially Emily. When Emily stayed late, Whisper stayed with her. When Emily was too tired to speak, Whisper pressed her head against her leg. And when Emily began to fall apart quietly in the way strong people often do, Whisper responded in an unexpected way. It began with a scarf. One evening, after another long day ending in more failed cement pours and a misordered lumber shipment, Emily sat in the partially constructed shed, head in hands. The night air was sharp, her fingertips numb. She hadn't cried in weeks. She didn't have time. But now the tears came sudden and hot. Whisper entered silently. In her mouth, clutched gently like prey, was a pale blue scarf, faded, frayed, familiar. It was Margaret's. Emily had found it weeks ago while packing up the cabin and left it in a drawer she never touched. Whisper dropped it in Emily's lap and lay beside her without a sound. Emily stared at it. The scent of lavender still clung to the fabric. Her fingers gripped it hard enough to shake. Then she pressed it to her face and wept. From that night on, Whisper brought the scarf each time Emily lingered too long on the property. Sometimes she'd carry it from the car. Sometimes it would simply appear in the tent where Emily kept her blueprints. Always there. Always waiting. It was Liam who noticed first. "She knows when you're breaking," he said quietly one afternoon as he added shading to a sketch of the enclosure. "She's putting you back together." The first inspection came on a bitter Thursday. Karen Boyd, a representative from the Montana Wildlife Compliance Office, arrived in a state-issued truck clipboard in hand, expression unreadable. She was a woman in her late 40s, compact and brisk with steel-gray eyes and a wind-chapped face. Her short blonde hair was tucked under a ranger-style cap. She didn't offer small talk. She walked the perimeter, measured fence heights, checked bolts, took photos of drainage lines and pond depth. She noted the lack of enrichment zones, no logs for climbing, no natural hideouts beyond the one crabapple tree. When she turned to Emily, her tone was flat. "You've done a lot of work, but it's not enough." Emily's stomach dropped. Karen continued. "The fencing depth is 6 inches too shallow in the south quarter. The observation post lacks storm protection. The pond's filtration system isn't complete. And she—" Karen nodded toward Whisper, who sat calmly nearby, "needs stimulation. Logs, branches, natural obstacles. Otherwise she'll get restless. And restless means dangerous." Emily tried to speak, but her throat closed. She nodded. "You'll get a report in 3 days, Karen said. "You can request a second inspection after 2 weeks if corrections are made." She left without another word. Emily sat on a stump near the crabapple tree and stared at the half-finished sanctuary. Around her, the sounds of tools had faded. Volunteers had gone home early. Snow was coming in. Whisper patted over and nudged the scarf into her lap once more. This time Emily didn't cry. She just sat holding the scarf and listened to the sound of a creature that had never spoken, telling her everything she needed to know. That night she made new plans. She ordered additional fencing out of her last savings. Maya's students researched affordable enrichment strategies, hanging meat-scented ropes, hiding toys in tree bark, creating scent trails with safe herbs. Liam offered to build a burrow den out of recycled tires and driftwood. Even Cal, for the first time since the project began, muttered, "Let's fix this," and stayed 2 hours after sunset to reinforce the posts. It wasn't just a sanctuary they were building anymore. It was faith. The night sky above Whisper Hollow was lit not just by stars, but by something ancient and electric. A full moon had risen high and pale, casting silver shadows across the snow-blanketed orchard. The branches stretched long and still, as though the earth itself was holding its breath. Liam stood quietly near the sanctuary fence, his winter coat zipped to the neck, his gloves a little too big for his hands. In one of those hands he held a second-hand smartphone borrowed from his mother. In the other, a flashlight angled low. His breath came in soft plumes as he waited. Whisper was pacing the enclosure's edge, ears, twitching eyes lifted to the sky. There was something different about her tonight, something charged. And then, without warning, she stopped. She tilted her head back and let out a single drawn-out sound, a howl long and trembling rising from the depth of her chest like a hymn from another world. Liam captured every second. The next morning, he uploaded the video with a simple caption, "Her name is Whisper. She's not ours, but we're hers. Please help us finish her home." The video exploded. Within 2 days, it had over 3 million views. Shared on wildlife forums, parenting groups, environmental education pages, it reached communities far beyond Montana. A famous animal rights influencer reposted it with the words, "This is what love looks like when it listens." Donations began to pour in. Volunteers signed up by the dozens. Retired carpenters from Wyoming, a group of veterinary students from Portland, even a family from Utah who had once raised an orphaned fox drove overnight to lend a hand. Emily watched it unfold with disbelief. She had never imagined that a single howl, something wild and honest, could move people across borders. The sanctuary site transformed overnight. What had taken months to half complete now rose like a cathedral of effort and unity. New faces filled the field. Heather Pike, a landscape designer in her early 30s, arrived with 2 dogs and a trailer full of native plants and logs collected from forest clearings. With her wild blonde curls, weathered jeans, and a hummingbird tattoo on her wrist, Heather had an easy laugh and a fierce energy. "You don't just build walls," she told Emily, sketching designs in the snow with a stick. "You build places for souls to breathe." Kumar Singh, a structural engineer originally from New Delhi, had retired early to travel the U.S. in a solar-powered van. He heard about Whisper from a campsite forum and showed up wearing a wool hat shaped like a raccoon. He didn't talk much, but his calculations for wind resistance and drainage corrected 3 major design flaws within hours. Liam continued documenting everything, not just with video but with his words. He began writing a blog called Whispering Forward, where he shared daily updates, highlighting volunteers, telling stories of Whisper's behaviors, sharing drawings and interviews. Emily would find him curled near the fire pit each evening, typing away into the glow of his tablet. Whisper always at his side. On the 14th day of the rebuild, the final piece of the enclosure was installed a reinforced gate with a 3-lock mechanism and observation camera built into the arch. Whisper tested the area herself, bounding through her expanded territory. Nose low, tail held high. The pond shimmered in the sun. Native shrubs lined the fence edges. Climbing logs and rock dens dotted the interior. It wasn't just functional. It was beautiful. On the 21st day, Dr. Meredith Shaw arrived. She wore the same white coat, her gray curls pulled back into a thick braid. There was a leather-bound notebook in her hand and the familiar calm in her eyes. She walked the perimeter slowly, whispering measurements under her breath, recording temperatures and observing stress markers in Whisper's gait. Emily walked beside her silent until Dr. Shaw stopped at the pond where Whisper was playfully pawing at the thin ice on its edges. "She hunts the reflections," Dr. Shaw noted, "like she's chasing the light." "She's different now," Emily said. "Not tamed, just home, Doctor." Shaw watched the wolf circle back toward them, tail swaying slightly, body low to the ground in a playful bow. Her golden eyes locked briefly with Emily's and then with Dr. Shaw's before she loped off toward the log den. "It's not just a wolf you saved, Emily," Dr. Shaw said quietly, her voice thickening. "You saved a part of yourself." Emily didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her hand touched the scarf wrapped around her neck, the one Whisper still brought her on difficult days. That scarf no longer symbolized loss. It had become something like a bridge between what had been and what was now becoming. The final report came in the next morning. Official approval. The sanctuary was recognized as a legal wildlife rehabilitation site with limited educational visitation privileges. Whisper was registered under the sanctuary's name as a bonded, non-releasable animal, meaning she would stay legally for the rest of her life. They held a small gathering that night beneath string lights and lanterns strung between the bare branches. Volunteers, students, neighbors, even Grace Atwood from the licensing office joined. There was no grand speech, no media, just people who had built something out of nothing. And at the heart of it, a wolf who had once been mistaken for a dog and a woman who had once forgotten how to belong. Whisper sat calmly beside the fire ears, flicking toward the sounds of laughter and shared food, but never straying too close. When the moon rose again, full, bold, familiar, she stood, tilted her head, and howled. This time, everyone listened. Spring came quietly to Cedar Valley. The orchard thawed slowly, letting go of snowdrifts like breath being exhaled. Where there had once been bare dirt and skeletal trees now bloomed small bursts of life. Moss returned to the stones. Insects skittered beneath thawed leaves, and early flowers dared open their petals to the cautious warmth. Whisper Hollow stirred with the same awakening. The sanctuary, now fully licensed and legally recognized, breathed with purpose. Emily Harper stood beneath the crabapple tree, now blooming faint pink against a pale sky. A laminated permit hung on the gatepost beside her, stamped and sealed by the Montana Wildlife Department. Whisper, leaner and stronger than ever, bounded across the soft earth, weaving through branches, her coat shimmering with early dew. She paused occasionally to sniff the breeze or to press her nose to the fence when visitors came near, always watching with that unreadable ancient gaze. Emily no longer wore gloves when she painted. Her hands had toughened from months of labor, and she liked the feel of the brush sliding across canvas without a barrier. She had converted the old orchard shed into a small, open-air studio, its walls lined with works in progress. Most of them featured Whisper. Not just as a wolf, but as a symbol curled under stars silhouetted on ridgelines, nose buried in snow or raised to the moon. One painting, titled Inheritance, showed Whisper sitting beside a younger wolf, fictional but hauntingly familiar, a memory of what she might have been if fate had not intervened. Emily had expected peace after the sanctuary was complete, but something else had bloomed responsibility. The first call came from a nearby ranger station. Someone had abandoned 2 raccoons in a cardboard box behind a hunting lodge. Then came a call about a blind fawn separated from its mother. Emily didn't say no. She never had. With Whisper's silent approval, she took them in. She expanded the enclosure. She began applying for grants. With the help of Maya Rivers, now her co-director, and the network of volunteers who refused to leave even after the fences were built, Whisper Hollow evolved from a rescue space into a sanctuary with intention. Each animal had a name, a story, a reason. Liam visited every weekend, his sketches more confident now, his words surer. That spring he proposed an idea, an art exhibition at the community hall, the Wild Heart Show, featuring his work, Emily's paintings, and collaborative pieces from children around the town. Proceeds would go to expanding Whisper Hollow's education center. Emily agreed. What she didn't expect was for Liam to open the night. He stood behind the podium, a clean collared shirt tucked neatly into dark jeans, his hands resting on a printed speech. Dozens of faces looked up at him. Parents, teachers, fellow students, volunteers from Whisper's early days. The stage lights flickered once. Then he began. My name is Liam Jacobs. Some of you know me from the library, or from sketching in the orchard, or because of a wolf. I used to be afraid to speak in front of people. I used to think that words didn't come out right. But then I met someone who didn't use words at all, and she taught me how to listen and how to be brave enough to make noise. Whisper taught me how to speak. Silence held the room like snowfall. Then came the applause, soft, rising, relentless. That night, Emily stood near the back of the hall, arms folded loosely across her chest. Maya clapped beside her. Dr. Shaw had made the trip to standing with a quiet pride in her eyes. Even Grace Atwood from licensing attended, notebook in hand, writing things with a small smile. When the show ended, Liam ran over to Emily and pulled her toward the display labeled Legacy, There, front and center, was his latest sketch, Whisper resting beneath the crabapple tree, a soft scarf draped beside her paws. "She still brings it out sometimes," Liam whispered. "I think she knows." Emily nodded. She had felt it too. A few days later, the world dimmed just slightly. Finn, her 17-year-old tabby and constant observer, passed in his sleep, curled near the window that faced the sanctuary. There was no drama, no sign of pain, just silence. Emily buried him beneath the oldest tree in the orchard, a ring of soft ferns growing wild around its base. She placed a flat stone atop the grave, etched with one word, "Watcher." Whisper sat beside her during the burial, her head low tail still. When Emily stood, the wolf brushed against her side, once a silent comfort. No howl, no sound, just presence. In the months that followed, Whisper became more than resident. She became a symbol. Local schools began organizing trips to the sanctuary. Emily gave talks awkward at first, but genuine, about wildlife protection, about understanding instincts, and about how love doesn't have to look like control. Liam helped build visual displays. Maya ran interactive science days. Whisper watched the children from a distance, ears pricked, eyes following their laughter. Some days she would trot near the fence and sit quietly while the kids read stories aloud. One girl, small and pale, came back week after week. She never spoke, but each time she visited, she brought a feather she found in her backyard and laid it near the fence. Whisper never touched them, but never ignored them either. On a particularly warm evening in June, Emily painted late into the night. The wind was gentle, stars unbothered. Whisper patrolled once around the perimeter, then circled back and lay beside her as she often did. "You saved me," Emily said aloud, dabbing color into the canvas. Whisper didn't look at her, but her tail thumped once soft against the grass. They stayed like that until morning. Not all miracles come wrapped in blinding light. Some arrive with quiet eyes, a tattered scarf, or a howl that breaks through the silence of a full moon. Whisper was never just a wolf. She was a whisper from God himself, sent to Emily, not with thunder, but with grace. Because not all divine messages come from pulpits or pages. Sometimes they come on four legs, through loyalty without language and love without condition. In our fast-moving world, it's easy to overlook the small miracles unfolding all around us. A cat resting beside a predator. A shy boy finding his voice, a town uniting, not out of duty, but faith. These are the signs that when love and trust walk hand in hand, God will make a way even in the wild. So, if you're feeling lost, weary, or forgotten, remember this. Sometimes God doesn't answer with lightning, but with a whisper. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a miracle. Comment. Amen. If you believe God still moves through the smallest acts of love, subscribe for more stories filled with hope, healing, and faith. And may God bless every heart that hears this, not just with ears, but with spirit. Amen.